The story of action in American thought and culture always coincides with the story of experience. In fact, experience becomes the honorific word for all of the pragmatic thinkers. Action is a primary theme in American thought from the pragmatists back and from the pragmatists forward.
Even before the pragmatists, Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson's great essay on experience, is one of the locations of that term in the American vocabulary, and it's one of the places where it's really given a kind of thematic importance.
Action is with the scholar subordinate, but it is essential. Without it, he is not yet man. Without it, thought can never ripen into truth.
And of course, James and others took Emerson quite seriously.
Both Dewey and James wrote Encomia for Emerson.
Experience was, as I said earlier, in terms of one of its acceptations, close to experiment. And the point that certain pragmatists in their more instrumental moods always made was that you have to intervene in the world, you have to act, that thought alone was insufficient, that pure contemplation was not enough.
This need to not only have an idea, but to want other people to accept it, number one, to want it to be tangible, concrete, and lived out.
So the experience was one of the ways in which people were drawn back into the world.
So the evasion of Cartesian subjectivism requires an analysis of, you might say, our subjectivity in our being gripped by the world in which we are involved necessarily and engaged.
By Cartesianism, I mean the primacy of subjectivity or selfhood, and it's basically the spectator, the I as spectator, the I as originally solitary, and only eventually, and in some respects, incidentally social.
The great pragmatist innovation, in a way, although I think it's shared by some European thinkers, is to move experience away from a purely subjective, internal, and in some way even solipsistic moment into a far more englobing kind of concept in which both subject and object were immersed.
The word experience carries risks of misunderstanding. The most obvious risk is that we'll understand it in a Cartesian way, as subjective, as somehow mental events somehow inside, I think Descartes' confused, but mental events somehow inside a non-spatial container.
Descartes and Locke gave us a picture of experience as something taking place within us that was distinct from anything physiological. And I don't think we need a notion of some non-physiological processes taking place within us.
Certainly critics like Richard Rorty have found that they were perhaps overly reliant on a covert metaphysical notion of experience, and he wants to get beyond that and even chuck out the idea of experience itself as unnecessary, stressing language and stressing a different level of interpretation rather than the level that moves us back to something called experience, primordial or otherwise.
I think that people like Wilfrid Sellars are right in suggesting that the notion of experience is more trouble than it's worth, that if you talk about linguistic behavior and the social practice of using language to give reasons for and against performing certain actions, you have captured everything that's unique about human beings. You don't also have to have an account of something called human experience. So I think that the notion of experience as a topic of philosophical inquiry was an unfortunate 17th century invention.
In my way of looking at it, that's a very thin account of what I experience. And without going into philosophical argumentation about it, I think what gets lost here are a number of things. One is the sense of history. Even if one gives articulation linguistically to history, you lose the influence, the actual hardcore influence on your social habits. And I think that's a drastic oversight of a linguistic account.
I think that if you just forget about notions like experience and consciousness and just talk about social practices, including particularly linguistic practices, you won't miss anything that's philosophically significant.
Peirce has this three-categoried system of philosophy, and the second of these categories is called secondness. And secondness is better described in experiential terms as resistance, constraint, otherness, something that is antagonistic. So this secondness stuff seems to me to get thoroughly lost in the linguistic turn, because there's nothing really pushing back. The pushing back is already enfolded into my linguistic story, into my habits of speech and so on. And you lose a sense of the gratingness of living through a life. I think it's important that any philosophy that moves forward, whether it's neo-pragmatism or pragmatism or idealism or materialism, that it not lose this sense, this strong sense, not just of an intellectual other, but of a radical, what Peirce used to call bruteness, that confronts you. You know, when you bump your head on the door is one of the ones he talks about, or when you're, if you've experienced any of this. I have a great example. When I used to work on a dairy farm, I was bending over to put feed into the stanchion for this very gentle cow, and the gentle cow very gently raised her head, and of course on their foreheads, it's all bony. The thing knocked me clear back against the wall. This very gentle seeming little cow, bang, and I'm back against the wall. Now, to tell this as a linguistic story is to miss the hardcore bruteness of the experience. So however you want to go about telling the rest of this pragmatic story, whether you want to take this linguistic turn or stick with the experience version that Dewey and James work on, I think it's crucial that this kind of thing not be missed, because that's really at the heart of everything that the early pragmatists were doing.
What the pragmatists used experience for was a kind of all-purpose tool to make the traditional separations between subject and object, or contemplation and action, to make these essentially antiquated and to move beyond them into a world of action, a world that was more process-oriented, a world that could involve pluralism and intervention, sometimes instrumental, sometimes aesthetic, but a world which was not simply settled.
So this becomes not only a tool, but a prerequisite for becoming an American scholar.
Dewey in particular thought that experience was a term that could have positive political impacts, and of course we know in pedagogical terms his whole educational theories were based on notions of experience.
Both William James and Charles Peirce draw on the psychologist Alexander Bain, a Scottish psychologist of the day, who argues that what belief is a willingness to act. If you believe something, you will be willing to act on it. So action, purpose, experience, all of these are ways of understanding what we thought, what the ideas are, what our beliefs are, and that's the story of the pragmatic tradition.